Frank Sutton became a household name in the 1960s, his booming voice and red-faced outbursts as Sergeant Vince Carter turning him into one of television's most unforgettable figures. To millions of viewers, he was the embodiment of military discipline, a man always seconds away from exploding in fury. But behind that familiar bark was a man wrestling with something far heavier than a sitcom script. For years, Frank carried the weight of silence, about his own war scars, about the pressure of fame, and about the uneasy atmosphere that followed him onto the set of Gomer Pyle, USMC. What he eventually admitted, late in his career, changed how fans understood him forever. A soldier before the spotlight. Long before Frank Sutton ever stood under the bright lights of a Hollywood soundstage, he had already fought real battles. His journey to fame began not with scripts or auditions, but with a fierce determination to serve his country. When World War II erupted, Sutton dreamed of joining the U.S. Marine Corps. He admired their discipline, their reputation, and the sense of honor that came with the uniform. For a young man who valued structure and toughness, the Marines seemed like the perfect fit. But in an instant, that dream collapsed. During the enlistment process, he failed the color vision test. That single disqualification meant he could never wear the uniform he wanted most. For someone who idolized the Marines, it was a crushing blow. Many men would have walked away, but Sutton's determination was stronger than disappointment. He turned instead to the U.S. Army, where he was accepted and quickly thrown into the heart of combat. He was deployed to the Pacific Theater, one of the most brutal battlegrounds of the war. Sutton would fight in no fewer than 14 separate assault landings, a number that still shocks those who later only knew him as a television comedian. This wasn't the resume of a pampered actor waiting for his big break. It was the life of a hardened soldier. In the steaming jungles and dangerous coastlines of the Pacific, Sutton learned the meaning of fear and survival. Night after night, he faced the possibility of death. Yet he pushed forward alongside his fellow soldiers. His courage earned him the Bronze Star for heroic or meritorious achievement, and the Purple Heart for wounds received in action. Those medals were proof of sacrifice, but Sutton himself rarely mentioned them. To him, they weren't tokens of glory. They were reminders of moments he had lived through, moments many of his comrades never survived. Decades later, when asked whether his military experience shaped the way he portrayed Sergeant Carter on Gomer Pyle, USMC, Sutton gave an answer that cut straight to the truth. "I just remember what it felt like to be scared and trying not to show it." That single sentence revealed more than any polished press release ever could. His trademark rage, the explosive shouting, the taut body language, these weren't just comedic tools. They were echoes of a soldier's reality, born from the memory of masking fear with discipline and authority. Yet Sutton never liked to talk about his service. Friends believed it was humility, the kind of quiet modesty common among veterans of his generation. Others thought it was because the memories carried pain too deep to revisit. Whatever the reason, by the time he returned home and graduated from Columbia University with honors in drama, his life seemed destined for something far different than war. But the truth was undeniable. The war had already carved its mark into him. Even on stage and screen, the shadows of his combat years followed him, shaping every role, every shout, every scowl. The soldier never left the actor. It simply lived beneath the spotlight, hidden in plain sight. Becoming Sergeant Carter. By 1964, Gomer Pyle, USMC, premiered on CBS as a spin-off from The Andy Griffith Show. Jim Nabors had won audiences over with his wide-eyed innocence and goofy charm as Gomer, and placing that character in the U.S. Marines created a setup ripe for comedy. Enter Frank Sutton as Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter. From the moment he marched onto the screen, red-faced and booming, he became the perfect foil to Nabors' bumbling recruit. Their dynamic was instant. One man all bluster and authority, the other naive and endlessly optimistic. Sutton's portrayal was so sharp, so authentic, that many assumed he wasn't acting at all. Viewers believed that the loud, impatient, perpetually outraged Carter was simply who Sutton was in real life. That misconception clung to him throughout his career, shadowing his private, more reserved nature. But for audiences at home, the chemistry between Neighbors' gentle Gomer and Sutton's volcanic Carter was irresistible. Within its first season, the show became a ratings powerhouse, pulling in millions of viewers each week and quickly securing its place as one of CBS's most successful sitcoms of the decade. Behind the laughter, though, the atmosphere was more complicated. Sutton was a perfectionist, someone who treated every half-hour sitcom as seriously as if it were live theater. He wanted the timing sharp, the jokes precise, the energy tight. Neighbors, on the other hand, had a looser, more casual approach. While he often played scenes with an easy, natural rhythm, Sutton drilled his lines, demanding rehearsal after rehearsal until he felt everything landed. Over time, those differences created friction. Crew members whispered about Sutton's frustrations when scenes veered too far into slapstick or dragged out unnecessarily. He didn't usually raise his voice off camera. His silence was far more unsettling. One producer later recalled, "Frank had a temper, but it was silent. You didn't want to be in the room when he stopped talking." By the fourth season, insiders noticed that Sutton and Neighbors interacted only when scripts required it. Off-camera, their relationship had cooled into distant professionalism. The end of Gomer Pyle and a shocking decision. By the late 1960s, Gomer Pyle, USMC, was still one of CBS's strongest shows. The pairing of Frank Sutton and Jim Neighbors had carried the sitcom for 5 seasons, delivering laughs while tapping into the popularity of military-themed comedies. But all things end, and in 1969, Neighbors stunned the network by announcing that he was done. He wanted to pursue singing, variety shows, and stage work. For Sutton, who had given so much of himself to Sergeant Carter, the announcement was like the floor falling away beneath him. Executives scrambled for a solution. CBS proposed Sergeant Carter, USMC, a spin-off that would put Sutton at the center. Early outlines even suggested a groundbreaking idea, introducing a black recruit who would always outwit Carter, flipping the formula of the original. On paper, it sounded fresh. For Sutton, however, it was exactly what he didn't want. He was exhausted from the constant yelling, the one-dimensional authority figure, the endless typecasting. He turned it down flat. That refusal stunned the network. To CBS, Frank Sutton was Sergeant Carter, and the audience still wanted more. But Sutton wanted out. He needed to prove, both to Hollywood and to himself, that he was more than a single character. So when Neighbors launched the Jim Neighbors Hour later that year, Sutton joined the cast, not as the drill sergeant, but as a sketch comedy regular. For him, it was a lifeline. He could still work with Neighbors, still have an audience, but avoid being trapped inside the uniform that had become his cage. The Jim Neighbors Hour and network pressure. The Jim Neighbors Hour debuted in 1969 with high expectations. The format blended music, comedy sketches, and guest stars, and it quickly found an audience. Alongside Neighbors, both Ronnie Schell and Frank Sutton returned, joined by singer Karen Morrow, the Tony Mordente dancers, and the Neighbors Kids. It was colorful, musical, and at times chaotic. But it worked. The show pulled in strong ratings and seemed set for a long run. But in the backrooms of CBS, friction was brewing. Executives were disappointed that Sutton had rejected the Sergeant Carter spin-off. They also believed he didn't quite fit the variety format. While he was excellent in sketches, Sutton couldn't sing or dance, and that set him apart in a program built around music. Soon, CBS demanded that Neighbors fire him. The message was blunt: drop Sutton or risk the show itself. Neighbors' response shocked them. He refused. For all their differences on the set of Gomer Pyle, Neighbors considered Sutton a loyal friend and a vital part of his success. He wouldn't betray him for ratings or to please a network. That decision carried consequences. After only 2 seasons, despite its strong performance, The Jim Neighbors Hour was canceled in 1971. Publicly, CBS blamed its sweeping rural purge, the effort to eliminate shows with a country feel like Mayberry RFD, the Beverly Hillbillies, and Green Acres. Privately, insiders knew the truth. The network had never forgiven Sutton for turning down the spinoff, and Neighbors' refusal to abandon him sealed the show's fate. For Sutton, the cancellation was a double blow. He had finally stepped out of Sergeant Carter's shadow, only to be dragged down by forces beyond his control. For Neighbors, it proved his loyalty, but it also ended one of the most promising variety shows of its era. What remained was the bond between the two men, a bond forged in laughter, tension, and ultimately defiance against a network that wanted to tear them apart. Typecasting, quiet years, and a heavy burden. After the Jim Neighbors Hour ended in 1971, Frank Sutton entered one of the most difficult chapters of his career. The industry still saw him as Sergeant Carter, and nothing else seemed to stick. Offers came, but nearly all of them were variations of the same character. Angry sergeants, loud bosses, authority figures who barked more than they spoke. Sutton turned most of them down. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life playing a caricature of himself. Instead, he turned his attention back to theater, where the audiences were smaller but the respect was greater. On stage, he could be someone other than Carter. He found joy in drama, in roles that demanded nuance rather than volume. Those who saw him in these productions described a man transformed, still intense, but in ways that revealed his depth rather than hiding it. Yet even in this refuge, the shadow of Sergeant Carter followed him. Fans greeted him with catchphrases from Gomer Pyle, children saluted him in public, and strangers begged him to yell like on TV. What had begun as flattery became a prison. His family noticed the toll. Sutton became more withdrawn in the early 1970s, pouring his energy into reading, studying, and spending quiet evenings at home with his wife Toby and their children. To those closest to him, he wasn't the brash sergeant. He was a thoughtful man, often seen with a book in hand, far removed from the character that had made him famous. But the weight of being trapped inside one role, while knowing he was capable of so much more, slowly wore him down. By 1974, Sutton seemed to be finding a fragile peace. He was starring in stage plays again, free from the cameras and the suffocating expectations of television. It was, in many ways, a rebirth. But fate had a cruel twist waiting. The final curtain and long silent truths. On June 28, 1974, Frank Sutton was in Shreveport, Louisiana, performing in the romantic comedy play Love. It was supposed to be the start of a new chapter. During a break between performances, he returned to his dressing room. Moments later, he collapsed from a massive heart attack. At only 50 years old, he was gone. The suddenness stunned everyone, fans, colleagues, and his family, who had seen him just hours earlier full of energy on stage. The funeral was quiet, as Sutton had lived much of his private life. No Hollywood fanfare, no press circus, just close friends and family. Jim Neighbors, deeply shaken, released a short statement praising Sutton as a brilliant performer and a good man. Yet even in death, Sutton remained Sergeant Carter in the eyes of millions. Tributes focused on the shouting Marine, rarely mentioning the war veteran, the scholar, or the stage actor who had spent years trying to reclaim his identity. For decades, the deeper story of Frank Sutton remained untold. Then, in 2023, an old audio interview resurfaced from the early 1970s. In it, Sutton was asked if he missed working on Gomer Pyle. After a long pause, he admitted, "I miss working. I miss doing something that people care about. But the show? Number. It boxed me in. You know how some people get typecast? I became the type." He added that while he respected Jim Neighbors, we were never close. We worked different. We thought different. I was yelling half the time because I was frustrated. Not at him, at the job, at how small it made everything feel. That single line, how small it made everything feel, was devastating. The role that had made him a star had also stripped him of the chance to be anything else, And yet, in his quiet way, he endured it. He carried the burden with dignity, never exploding in public, never lashing out at fans, even as the weight grew heavier. Today, when reruns of Gomer Pyle, USMC air, viewers still laugh at Sutton's furious outbursts. But behind those laughs lies the story of a man who gave everything to a role that took more than it ever gave back. His silence was his shield, but his final words revealed the truth. Frank Sutton wasn't Sergeant Carter. He was a war hero, a scholar, a husband, and a father, trapped in the uniform of a character he never fully escaped. Frank Sutton's story is more than just television history. It's a reminder of the cost of fame and the unseen battles behind the laughter. What do you remember most about Sergeant Carter? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood legends.